How propaganda shapes our energy choices. We are live on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitter, X. It's a great pleasure having Cyrus Brooks. Good afternoon, Cyrus Brooks.
Well, yeah, good afternoon, and good evening to those in Europe, and even good morning maybe to those in Asia.
Yeah, sunny in Asia. Okay, this is the profile of Cyrus Brooks. You can access this LinkedIn profile and make contact with him if needed. So the idea is to Cyrus start with a presentation of around 20 minutes, and just after we can start conversations with tricky questions for him. Okay, Cyrus,
Yeah,
please.
sounds good. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting topic, and propaganda is a really interesting uh, thing to talk about as far as energy goes. And so I just wanted to start with the next slide about, well, where did this come from? Originally, propaganda actually is a church word. Propaganda is that I can't even pronounce it. Congregatio de Propaganda Fide, right? So it's all about, at that time, it was about missionary work, propagating the faith, right? To spread the faith of Christianity, and that's really where this idea come from, to spread the ideas of something. And but a little bit later, and if you go to the next one, things started to change, right? In World War One, and you got in Oxford Dictionary here, it talks about information, especially biased or misleading, but you're trying to promote some kind of view, right? A point of view or a political cause. You can see these famous posters. They're both quite similar in World War One, and to try to get everyone to, yes, join the army and so forth. More on that, on war propaganda later. If you can go to the next one. And well, how about public relations? Well, it's interesting. Public relations is actually supposed to mean that you have good work and you're publicizing your good work. So it could be, you're helping in the community with a cleanup or planting a tree. It could mean that you're just a really good company, that you make really good pizza, that people like you, and you make a nice pizza. It tastes delicious. It's a good price. And that in itself, and just letting people know that is actually proper public relations or PR. And there's nothing really particularly wrong with that version of it. Go to the next one. And but interesting is the father of PR or public relations was Edward Bernays. He was the nephew of Sigmund Freud, and for sure he learned a thing or two from his uncle. He actually was asked one time about from the American Tobacco Company about they had a problem. They had very, 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 very few women smokers. And so what did he do? Well, he got a campaign, and he got these very fashionable women in 1929 to walk at the front of this Easter Day parade in New York, and they lit up some cigarettes, and then the reporters took photos of this, and they called them torches of freedom, and it was tied to the feminist movement and rights of women and all this kind of thing. And so it was a propaganda technique to get women to smoke, to popularize. So a private company used this technique to get more women to smoke. So it wasn't about good work, well publicized, or anything like this. It was a way to change people's mental attitudes towards something. Yeah, you can go to the next one. The most famous guy was, of course, Goebbels, or Goebbels. He was the Nazi minister of propaganda. So he said some incredible things, actually. And now, if you think about what these mean to us today, Of course, we know the one, if you repeat a lie often enough, people will believe it. And if you you will even come to believe it yourself. And he says further, a lie told once remains a lie, but a lie told 1,000 times becomes the truth. Okay, well, I think we've kind of, especially with social media, start to hit this situation where it doesn't really, in some cases, it seems like it doesn't really matter whether it's true or not. It's just whether it's, shared 1,000,000 times on social media, and then you're starting to get this lie told over and over. Or in legacy media, if they do the same story, which I'll show you a bit later, they're actually doing these stories over and over. They're the same story. And then, of course, people start to believe there's truth in it. Interesting. 2 more quotes from this guy, Goebbels. Propaganda works best when those who are being manipulated are confident they're acting on their own free will. Of course, that's a really tough one, right? Because you have to be confident in yourself that you're not being influenced by, unduly influenced by all of this misinformation, right? Now, even more important, and I think you would agree with this one, Armando, think of the press as a great keyboard on which the government can play. So this was interesting. I mean, it was about lies. It was about people thinking that they were believing it by themselves or their own free will, and it was about government using the media to forward this propaganda. So this was kind of a standard set by Goebbels. Now, interestingly, I think one thing to consider here is just because someone is bad doesn't mean they're good at what they're doing. And in this case, he was really good, right? But he was good at being bad, you could say.
Yeah, that's
so, right. But you have to kind of have a healthy respect for your enemy, so to speak, right? So that you don't underestimate them, and this guy knew what he was doing, but he just used it in a really bad way. Let's go to the next one. Okay, so then if you think about, energy, you got to think in terms of these 3 ideas here. One is you got data, and then one is you got opinions, and then when you have narratives, right? And so definitely we want to think about this in the first case. Okay, well, here's a guy who's taking some readings on a meter. Well, this is just data. This is just raw information, has no emotion, has no consequences, has nothing. It's just information. And on the right, you can see people talking and maybe giving their opinion. And at the bottom, this is the old idea of when there was the 13 colonies, we had to join or else die. So this was way back 200 years ago when the US were colonies and they had to be together or they thought they would actually not survive. So this was truly a narrative. This was not necessarily true or false. I mean, this was an opinion that someone was putting forward as a truth. And this is what you could call a narrative. Okay, next one. All right, and interesting. Now I'm going to try to say this really quickly. Coal. Now I'm not actually related to the coal industry. I just noticed that coal has been having a hard time recently, right? Coal. What is coal? Well, coal is mostly these 4 things. They are mostly has to do with how much carbon content in them, moisture in them, and other energy content in them. And basically, you start with peat, and then you go to lignite and bituminous coal and anthracite. These have more energy and more carbon in them, which you can burn. Right? This is basically, so this is data. This is not opinion. This is not narrative. This is basically what it is, right? Now, if you can go to the next slide. All right, and if we're honest, we also have to look at some of the benefits of even coal. Now, why am I saying coal? I'm actually not working in the industry, but I'll tell you in a moment why I'm talking about coal. There's a whole reason here. It's cheap and it's abundant, and it has also allowed the development of industries and products around the world. So all the industry that we have today, really, you could say they all started really from coal, and prior to that, it was basically wood fire, right? So it also has created jobs around the world, and you can also do other things with it. You can create gas, like natural gas. You can create it from coal, and you can also pair it with renewables, and you can use carbon capture and other things. Okay, next one. Oh, by the way,
Yep.
some of these, this slide, I wanted to tell you about, if you look at propaganda. Now, I actually asked this little bit of data from the AI, from Bing AI, ChatGPT, that kind of thing. So I had to try really hard to get Bing to answer the question, because as you can see at the very end, Bing had to answer, even though I just asked, what are the benefits of coal? But it says, however, coal also has many negative impacts on the environment, health, and climate that cannot be ignored in the long term. Wow, how interesting is that? So that basically Bing's AI, the developers of the AI, have actually put a bias inside the AI. So already it's difficult to get a straight answer. When I said, tell me the positive impacts or the benefits of coal, I didn't ask for any negatives, right? Actually, I tried to ask the question like 3 times, and it still has to put this last point down, right? That, you have to look at these climate impacts, environment impacts. Well, you may have to do that, but I didn't ask for it. So there's an obvious bias, which is what we need to look out for. Next slide.
Yeah, but this is not what Greta and Birol think, no? They think differently.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting that some human's bias has entered into the program. So, and when we use it we use the AI to also help us get answers. We don't know what influence, what the narrative is behind the information we're getting. Okay. And then, so the truth is that there is some improvement in coal. So we have to give some, it's due, coal is due. It does have, it is possible that we could get some carbon capture. We do have what's called FGD, or flue gas desulfurization. Basically, the clean coal, what we've done is we've removed a lot of the SO2, and through some of these processes in the screen, right, filters, scrubbers, we've moved particles, particulate matter, we've removed NOx, and so forth. Now, but when you look at, right, the propaganda, on the one hand, you have Popular Mechanics, who talks a little bit more fairly about it, about just generally without emotion, whereas Reuters investigates the sooty secrets and talks about the truth about clean coal, which of course is biased. They talk about the improvements in NOx, but what they don't show you in that story is the graph coming up. If you go to the next slide. So this is the problem with that story from Reuters, is although they didn't find a lot of nitrous oxide improvement, but actually the nitrous oxide has improved from the 1995 levels, has improved like 85%. So that's mentioned nowhere in the story. And this graph here is actually on the EPA's website. So the Environmental Protection Agency actually says the truth that, well, emissions have actually improved from 1995, right, which was actually Bill Clinton's presidency, right? So it actually, through many presidencies, doesn't matter Republican, Democrat, through many presidencies, they improved 92% for sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen oxides is 85%. Okay, let's go to the next one. But still, we talk about the coal as the deadliest fuel, right? It's so deadly. Okay, but let's go to the next slide and let's investigate. Well, the actual truth about the matter is it had in 2022, it did have 10 occupational fatalities, right, among 66,000 coal miners. Now, it is a little bit high, but actually, when you look at the total amount of fatalities, we're talking about 5,500 per year of work injuries. So the average is around 3.5. So 10 is quite a bit above the average, right? It didn't say 10 per year, but it said 10 total for 2022. So it is a dangerous industry, right? But that when they say deadly, it's not the deadliest. So go to the next one. We'll talk about it. What is the truth? Okay, well, actually, the most dangerous industry, right, is actually, if you look at transportation at the end, the last paragraph there, that is the most frequent kind of fatal accident, right? So it's a little bit deceptive, right? So you can use any statistic to make your narrative kind of fit what you want to say. So to be fair to coal, but fair to the statisticians, it is dangerous. But is it the most dangerous? No, it's not. Okay. So, let's go on to the next slide.
And which of the energies are the most dangerous, you see?
Well, I haven't compared the actual workers, but coal at 10 for a year. I know that wind industry, they have to go up there physically on those turbines, they're 300 feet tall, and I know there's been some fatalities there. All forms of industry. One of the most dangerous forms of energy, unfortunately, is hydropower, because the problem with hydropower, as good as it is, I know you're from Brazil, so I'm not trying to scare you, but it's true. If you get a failure in a dam, a hydroelectric dam, it's so dangerous. Hundreds of thousands of people died in China in the biggest hydropower incident ever recorded. Hundreds of thousands of people. So it's probably the worst industry in history, but probably overall, I think that most of these industries are pretty safe. They have pretty safe measures,
including nuclear.
Including nuclear. Nuclear is one of the safest because it's so you have to be much more careful. But I would say that places in the world which have, and this goes a little bit, we start talking about natural gas, and let me get back to that question. Now, why did I talk about coal? Well, here's the point, right? They've been working hard for decades to make coal look bad. Now, it's not the perfect fuel already. We know, right? It does have pollution, and it does cost money to clean it up to make it better. And a lot of countries don't clean it up because they can't afford that part of it. So they're using the cheapest fuel and it's dirty. And China, we know, is a good example.
Yeah, let me
So,
interrupt you
yeah,
because we have a visitant, very important visitant. Stuart Turley is here with
yes.
us, and he is publishing a question for you. So seems like more people from burning dung, wood, and other stuff for cooking. Haha. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and there is, and that is like when you look at the narratives and you look at the data, that's the difference, we have to look at the data of, we talk about 10 people died as in a mining accident, and compared to overall accidents, it's 5,500 people died in work-related accidents.
Yeah, but
Now
you're talking about
million.
accidents, but we need to talk about CO2 and the consequence of the use of the energy. Is different from accidents in the industry, in the manufacturing
Right.
process.
Yeah, and well, that's true. That's true. And in the case of the actual air pollution, right? I think the biggest problem with air pollution is what Stuart was talking about. Is in places like the developing world where they're using wood fire indoors. We're talking about serious air pollution that actually, literally, people go to the hospital for their lungs and they die. And the basically pulmonary problems cause upwards between 3 and 4 million people to die every year. And this is simply from burning fuel indoors, which is basically so much particulate matter that you're causing lung damage.
Is the case of the banning of natural gas inside homes in the United States, for instance?
Well, and this is the case. This is the interesting point. So we see plenty of news stories which try to convince us that natural gas is deadly in your gas stove. But unfortunately, the truth is, when you look at studies, even the studies that talk about natural gas and some possible linkage to this, that, or the other thing, they're inconclusive. Yet it's not inconclusive at all when people in Africa or in South Asia have pulmonary problems for these other fuels. So why is that? I think it's a pretty much common sense, and I'm going to get to that in a moment, about how we dissect and separate out these narratives from truth. But I wanted to bring this up. Why did I talk about coal? Well, basically the propaganda, the media and certain interest groups who have a vested interest in actually basically ruining the reputation of coal. And I was wondering about this because, a lot of us agree that coal is not the best fuel because it doesn't burn as cleanly as other fuels. But why did they do that? And then I think I discovered why. And I think we've all been discovering why, which is, as you can see here, natural gas is way worse than coal. What? So this is what we've only really started to hear, right, in the last few years. This idea that natural gas is worse than coal. Well, they could only start to say that after really putting coal in the garbage bin, right? They really put the reputation of coal and, put it out with the garbage. So, so I think as a public relations trained person, as I am, I thought this is genius, and this is what I'm talking about the Nazi propagandists. You have to have a healthy respect for what a person does, even if you don't like them, right?
Yeah, let me interrupt you because
Yeah.
a professor from Brazil, Hernani Chaves, saying that in Brazil, carbon miners, they retire with 16 years of work, only 16. Only is not an expression, but 16 compared to 35 or 40 that a normal
Yeah.
worker retire. Thank you,
Yeah,
Hernani
yeah,
Chaves.
and I'm not promoting coal as perfectly clean, and I think coal miners, I mean, you're breathing the dust, and I don't know I'm not an expert to know. Um, I'm sure the work is much better than it used to be,
Uh-huh.
but yeah, 16 years. I mean, it really goes to show that coal mining is still not it's
The
it's
safest place
still
to work. Yeah, yeah.
it's a tough place to work, and so but I'm not going to totally say don't do it either,
Yeah.
because it's a job, and also people all around the world need jobs, and if that's what they got, I'm not going to stop them.
So
But that's
you
where
mean,
you have to take the data and you have to start to evaluate the data.
but you are in this slide, you are saying that natural gas is worse than coal. Is it correct?
Well, I don't think it is, but I think that the campaign to say that is brilliant. If you are an anti-fossil fuel person, of course, first thing you do is you say coal is terrible, and you get everyone to agree. Then you just say, well, natural gas is worse. And I thought, wow, how smart is that? Because we already see there's a thing in public relations called positioning, and it's that place in your mind, right? Now, if the place of in your mind about coal is really bad, then all you have to do is say something is worse than it. It's really brilliant. And so, as you can see, all these articles are really saying the same thing. And another thing that's interesting about these articles, you'll also find the same people mentioned in these articles. Like the first one, you can see on the left mentions a famous Bill McKibben, and also on you're going to find that name at the very last one as well, Bill McKibben.
So
right?
you mean that they are being paid to make these considerations?
Well, they are in a way, and you go to the next slide. I'll tell you what that means. Okay, we'll get back to about the money going to those people, but let's talk a little bit about experts versus regular people. I think that we're all very aware of Dr. Fauci. Some people may think he's a great guy and he's a real expert. Other people may think he's not.
Him.
Yes, and but I wanted to put, the funny thing is we've kind of created a situation where we rely on information directly from a person like Fauci, and when a regular guy, like a doctor, this is a doctor whose name is Zelenko, if you remember him. I think he passed away, but Dr. Zelenko actually was treating people right straight up in 2020 with hydroxychloroquine and other things. And as a doctor, he said he never lost any patient. He was 100%. He had on the ground experience. So of course, New York Times and other people started to attack him. But the regular guy, right? He's not the famous guy. He's just saying, look, this is what I did. This is what I tried, right? So you're really getting an interesting difference of one person who says, you got to believe me, and another person who's actually doing it, who says, well, this is what the evidence shows me, right? And so this is an interesting little idea here is you have the person who's saying that you have to believe something, and then you have a person who's saying, well, this is the evidence I found. And I'll show you how in history how this works out. Go to the next one.
Yes, let me interrupt you a little bit to show a question. LinkedIn user probably is Stuart, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
That makes sense, yeah. Position natural gas is worse than coal, makes sense. Do you think that the global push to demonize fossil fuels is getting worse because the numbers about sustainability of wind and solar are surfacing?
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, the costs are starting to, become clear. And when the cost of alternative energy sources become clear, then the narrative, we talked about the narrative before, right? The narrative gets questioned, right?
Yeah.
And I wanted to tell you a little bit about a narrative, and 3 famous narratives you probably have heard, right? The first one is Lyndon B. Johnson. By the way, he's a Democrat, so it's not particularly which party. So Lyndon B. Johnson's, he of course brought us into Vietnam. Now, how did he do that? Well, that was the famous Gulf of Tonkin incident, right? So this is when the U.S. Navy said that the Vietnamese boats attacked the U.S. Navy. I'm just trying to imagine this occurring, but okay. Anyway, it was turned out in the end that it was exaggerated, and that they had actually provoked those boats to attack, and that the second attack that they did report never happened at all. And so this was the narrative that justified going into Vietnam, costing 50,000 American lives, and I think it's 2 million Vietnamese lives. And finally, we didn't we left, like Afghanistan, and the North Korea still was there. So one wonders, if one never went in, what would have happened? And as we know, George W. Bush, there was weapons of mass destruction, which of course we know we never found. And
so Democrat, of course.
Yeah,
he's a Democrat.
One might say. And Nixon, of course, famously, Nixon had all sorts of issues, including a bit of a blacklist, enemies list. But he also, of course, had Watergate. So all these guys were these famous, figures that had people going for quite a while. Let me move on to the next one. So now you get people like, so if you get, say, Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis, sounds really good. And of course, it's interesting because they sound just like the IEA, right? The International or the Institute for Energy Economics, and I think that's it, IEA. Oh, I have to get that one. Someone has to give me that one. But there's another, the association, right? And for Energy Economics Association, something like that.
Okay.
And but look at who funds them, right? Climate Works, Climate Imperative, Energy Foundation, the Just Transition Foundation, all these foundations, Rockefeller Brothers Funds, Rockefeller.
So you are saying that in most of the case, propaganda is something threatening and dangerous.
Well, what I'm saying is that propagandists are pushing a certain narrative, right, and not saying it. And they're one of the tricks of Black propaganda itself, the definition of Black propaganda, is to conceal the source, right? Conceal the source. Right now, the Nazis were a little bit different because they were so blatant, they were so open, right? And of course they were at war. But all these other foundations, you see, the real source of these information are
This is
hidden.
the point. this is the point. So propaganda could not be based on facts, data, statistical approaches, more related to intentions and sometimes bad intentions to convince someone with a wrong thing. Is it correct?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, and I can quickly go through the rest, and let's talk about it. Let's talk about it.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so just a little bit of heresy. This is Galileo, and it actually went back all the way to the 3rd century BC. The first idea that the Earth revolves around the sun. Another heresy was blood circulates around the body. They didn't believe that until like 1600, and they even had someone said there could only be 7 planets because 7 was a special number. That was Hegel, I believe, and so forth. But how can you read between the lines on propaganda? Well, basically, I would say that you have to understand the simplicity. You have to trust yourself. You have to ask questions like good or bad for who, what are the pros and cons and the costs. Now, I give you just a quick example is natural gas. It's actually quite simple what it is. Instead of being something like I said with coal is essentially this carbon forms, and essentially you have a carbon with 4 hydrogens, that's methane. You have 2 carbons with 6 hydrogen, that's ethane, and so forth. It's really simple to understand. And I think that's one thing that people need to understand is that with propaganda, you can break through by trying to understand one simplicity about it. That was what I want to start.
The last one?
Yes. And, now speaking of natural gas, I wanted to get to natural gas because we talked about propaganda and we talked about, the LNG pause by President Biden. So, this is really interesting. How this occurred was entirely from propaganda, right? So you might have read that the Venture Global's T2 export facility.
Yeah.
The C2 export facility was basically on the approval lines, you could say.
Yeah.
And but people were mouthing off about it that, we shouldn't let this happen, we shouldn't let this happen, we shouldn't let this happen.
And how can you recognize when a propaganda is something bad or something real based on facts and data? How can you do that?
I think one of the things is that you have to, if you yourself can see that they're already, I think, it's actually a little bit easier than it was in the past. Nowadays, most of the time, the media is actually making a decision for you already. And that's probably the first thing you could look out for, right? It is that they already have made the decision, and the important point is, it's one thing to state, as they used to do in the newspapers, I'm sure you remember, there used to be a clear opinion section, and where people would put out their opinion, and then everywhere else you were hoping that it was the news, that it was reported properly and objectively. But in nowadays, it's already they've decided for you.
So you must be an expert to take the best decision. So without being an expert, media will do for you.
Yeah, well, and that is where they get you, right? And that goes back to the quote I said from Goebbels, right? Is they got to make you think that you are believing something of your own free will. And that is really your key to basically unlocking and dissecting and getting rid of the effects of propaganda. By yourself, you have to actually, instead of accepting something, you have to look at it quite critically you gotta say first, well, have they already decided? You know, for example, the title.
Yeah. Yeah, but for instance, for EVs, the propaganda is very strong to use electric vehicles and so. And sometimes it's not the best solution for normal people. It's for and so this is pure propaganda and elected people taking decisions in name of normal people.
Yes, and this is the I think this is a key point is you have to have a story to get people to believe it, and also to get people to ignore all the facts in front of their eyes. So, you know, for example, when the gasoline prices went up to, what was it, $9 in California in the height of the war, you know, we had to really keep the propaganda machine going about supporting a war in Ukraine, supporting the sanctions against Russia, because, you know, the facts and the data surrounding us was really, you know, quite negative. All the inflation, all the negative effects of what we were doing would kind of give one pause or make one say, well, you know, is this really a good idea? And look, I mean, I'm not supporting war. I'm not supporting Putin's effort in Ukraine. I'm not, you know, I'm not supporting that kind of activity. I don't think he should have invaded Ukraine. I mean, I think he seemed to have given up on diplomacy as everyone else did. But at the same time, you know, how come we don't ask the question? I think that is the important point.
It's interesting because you see that we do not have freedom enough to make the best decisions.
Yes.
Someone is driving us to decisions that they want to follow.
And that is why we see Elon Musk talk about the freedom of speech, right? Is because, you know, if you control the narrative and then you also control what information people can see and what they can't see. Well, I mean, you know, it truly is a ministry of propaganda kind of activity. So, you know, look, I mean, I think that we have to be fair to our fellow human beings. I think it's unfair to people to say that you are not smart enough to be able to figure it out by yourself. You're not smart enough to understand this issue. Yeah. We have to be a gatekeeper and stop you from reading information which might be wrong. I think that's disrespectful.
Why oil and gas, for instance, they do not have propaganda enough? I mean, an absence of propaganda. Why? What's the reason they do not promote the benefits and the logistics, irreplaceable logistics and things like that?
Yeah, I think that you know a lot of industries, including and especially oil and gas, have tried over the years to improve their public relations image, and you know, and certainly you know, there have been some public relations disasters. You know, when they had some environmental oil spills and things like that. I think that they are pushed in some ways. You know, I think there's a negative impact from this you know, investor-driven kind of model. But also I think to some degree they've just backed off. You know, they have been attacked so thoroughly that they have really backed off from communicating. You know, they communicate at COP and they communicate elsewhere. But I think they do have a proper story to tell to the public. And Yeah.
And Cyrus, how do you see the strong propaganda that the International Energy Agency they do in terms of CO2 emissions and the risk for humanity?
Well, I think that, let's address CO2 emissions. Well, CO2 emissions, definitely there's a large amount of people that believe that's going to cause rising temperatures and that's going to cause a huge problem. So essentially, I think that, this is where you can actually cut it down to some simple idea. And this is simplicity. Well, what does that mean? I mean, essentially, we're talking about an insurance policy. In other words, we're talking about something that may happen, something that may not happen, something that may be a problem, something that may not be a problem. And that is actually a very, very, very true statement. These are not certainties. These are possibilities, right? So then one should treat them that way, and one should, make precautions and look at, it's kind of like a disaster that could happen to your home. You have to have insurance, and that's the way to look at it. But you see, the problem with the propagandists on this issue, whether it's people at the IEA or other places, twofold. One is, well, they basically make a living by creating basically by making this a problem. If in fact this isn't a problem, or if in fact we have a good idea how to, abate, right, or moderate the problem, right, make it less dangerous, then their reason for existence actually diminishes. And this is part of the problem of all these groups. Even a human rights group. I mean, if for example, I have a women's right to vote group. Well, as soon as they get that right, the group has no purpose anymore, right? So, and this is true about many of these groups. These social justice groups have to justify their purpose and their existence. And they do it by talking about how bad things are, even if things have improved.
Cyrus, temperature increase is more related to propaganda and narratives, or is based on facts and data?
Well, I think that it's quite controversial right now. It's quite difficult to really get a truthful saying. So I do follow people like Bjorn Lomborg and also Steve Koonin. I mean, and when I hear them talk, the interesting point is one, they talk about there are a lot of uncertainties about this data. But both of them point out something very interesting, is that, look, even if this is really happening, right, you can basically prepare for this kind of thing. But the problem with disadvantaged communities and the whole idea of environmental justice is that people have less economic means, right, to take care of their environment. What they do is they try to remove every possible danger from the environment instead of empowering the community to handle the environment themselves. I mean, it would be like saying that poor people are, more likely to have car accidents, and then you just say, well, let's just tell them not to drive. I mean, it's like, that would be insane, right? No, what you would do, of course, is you would see, well, why are they in such bad economic straits? And you'd say, well, maybe because, there were factories and there were things, and then they all got moved out, and, because of tax structures and things. I mean, you would handle the economics, because poor people, basically, there's one common denominator about people in poverty, and I'm right here in Johannesburg, so I know what I'm talking about. People in poverty don't want to be poor. I mean, that's a fact. I mean, I'm sure you visited Sao Paulo and all the other places where where there's a big gap between rich and poor.
Yeah.
And when you really talk to people, they don't really care about, they don't really want government handouts. They don't really want all this stuff. They just don't want to be poor.
Yeah, Cyrus, going to the conclusions, what we normal people, what we should do to be protected for these threats of propaganda narratives and bad intentions? What must we do? Do we have something to protect ourselves?
Yeah, I'd say, firstly, you have to understand what we're trying to achieve. That's probably number one. Is when you think about things like climate change and people doing, trying to put in solar and wind and different things like that. Overall, we have to ask the question, well, what are we trying to achieve? Like, is the only objective to not have fossil fuels at all costs, right? That's probably a bad idea, right? A better idea might be affordable energy for everybody, That would be number one. It's just you have to ask, with these big changes, you have to ask, well, what is the goal here? What is the final goal? And then the second point is when they say something, when media says something, government says something that sounds reasonable, so to speak, but you have to also ask the question about, how does it impinge, or how does it affect or impact the regular guy? So for example, if you really care about poor people, but you're gonna not allow any internal combustion engine cars by 2035, well, you say, well, what's the cost, right? And can all those poor people afford such a car? Will they be able to afford the electricity? I mean, these are really important questions, and plus, why do I need government to tell me anyway? Why should I give up the right to decide by myself? So that's another question that one really should ask. And if you find you're giving up rights, if you find that the whole goal that they're trying to accomplish has nothing to do with like people in a better standard of living, then you might really question, their real motives and whether or not you want to participate.
Thank you so much, Cyrus Brooks, Media Relations in RBAC Incorporation. But you are not in Houston, not in Dallas. Oh, Houston, sorry.
I'm currently in Johannesburg, South Africa, and it's an outrageously beautiful place. It has a sky much like this virtual background behind me.
But forever or for a little time?
For a little time, but some months, enough time to really meet people, know people, and become friends with people living real lives.
South Africa. Thank you. Thank you, Cyrus. Have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.